To the faculty, staff, trustees of this fine university, and to my dear friend and teacher, President Brian Blunt. I was nervous that Dr. Blunt was going to introduce me because I know how thorough of a scholar, and how thoughtful and how diligent of a researcher that he is. And so I was scared that if he introduced me, his introduction would be better than my sermon. So y'all pray for me. To the graduating class, today is about you. You've earned it. However, having sat in your seat on multiple occasions, I understand something. I understand firsthand how this day was made possible by parents who slipped you money, by spouses who went to work, by children who sacrificed time, by communities that kept you lifted in prayer and encouraged you, by professors that challenged you, by friends that affirmed you. And because I know how important this day is for you, I also know it's so much more important for them. And it's also important for us before we can appropriately celebrate you, for us to take the time to celebrate them. So therefore, I would ask if you would do me a favor. If you would all just stand to your feet, the graduating class, and turn around and put your hands together. To this beautiful community, thank you. Thank you. John 4. Who cares? From Genesis to Revelation, there's a dominant theme throughout the Bible. God sides with those on the underside of power. Consider the Hebrew Bible. From the story of slavery in Egypt to that of exile in Babylon, the most memorable narratives involve a God who stands over against systems of oppression. And with insistent courage and crystal clear moral conviction, the Hebrew prophets speak of God's care for the most vulnerable in Israel. To quote Amos, whenever leaders trample the heads of the poor and push the afflicted out of the way, that society is on a crash course with moral judgment and cultural decay. We also witness this in the life of Jesus. Jesus inaugurates his ministry by quoting from Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's anointed me to bring the good news to the poor, sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free." Couple this with what has to be considered Jesus' boldest and bravest parable in Matthew 25. It's here where Jesus reveals a God who identifies most with those who are hungry, thirsty, strangers, ill, and the imprisoned. For as we treat them, Jesus teaches us, we also treat God. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You've taken courses with Professor Samuel L. Adams and Katie Geneva Cannon. Francis Taylor Ginch and Richard Valls have helped you to think critically and liturgically about the less than just traditions of our faith. And Brian Blunt and Sung Hee Chang inspire confidence to embrace cultural difference in order to build bridges of empathy from the intellectual materials of cross-cultural understanding. This is what you do. This is who you are. Let's be honest, you didn't pursue an education at Union Presbyterian Seminary because you had visions of great financial gain on the other side. Nor did you come here because this is a proven track to job security. In fact, most of you probably enrolled in seminary despite a few side eyes and protests from some folk who love you. But you're here. You're here because God's call is always greater than understandable caution. You're here because a commitment to serve faithfully trumps an allure to gain financially. And you are here because you have accepted earlier in your life what so many testify to at the end of their days. It's not how we earn a living that matters. What's more important is have we lived a life that was worth living. Nevertheless, as we leave this campus, we still have to ask ourselves and wrestle with an important question. And that one is, who cares? Who cares? Yeah, today's a special day for you. You've scraped by and you've sacrificed. And you've scraped by and sacrificed only to have your day upstaged by our national puerile fascination with a royal wedding. You've studied and prayed only to awake to another mass shooting in one of our schools. You've researched and written about moral frameworks and ethical traditions to live in a world that rewards deceit and deception, and serve a church that appears increasingly comfortable with embracing a theology of duplicity and a liturgy of dissimulation. To look out in our world from a panoramic perspective today, it would seem that even the church has accepted the mendacity and quiescence in exchange for cultural relevance and political access. We've traded moral virtue for common cause. We've sacrificed the eternal truth of Jesus' teaching for the falsehoods of an emperor without on any clothes. This is why the question must answer itself inside of you. It must answer itself inside of us. Who cares? We must care. Like Jesus here in John 4, the animating question of our respective careers will not be what will we do or what shall we do. Yes, those are important questions, but that's a question that comes after the fundamental question that you've been wrestling with and should keep on wrestling with. And that simply is, who are we called to be? The Gospel of John gives us a great example. This is one of my favorite stories. Jesus encounters this Samaritan woman at the well. You all know that Jews in Judea and Galilee viewed Samaritans with contempt. You know that they viewed them with a dehumanizing disdain. In fact, they considered this particular group of people dogs. Interestingly enough, socially and culturally, it's really more accurate to think of Judeans and Samaritans as interrelated than archenemies. They actually shared much more in common. They both adhered to a strict monotheism. They both followed the Torah. They shared a border. They probably had the same hopes and dreams for their children to provide a better life free of imperial domination. Yet it was a disagreement over the proper place of worship of the temple that divided them. And it's this distinction this was enough for those in power to label the Samaritans as aberrant and deviant. Psychotherapists might refer to this as an exaggerated distinction, also known as narcissism of minor differences. That's to say, when competing communities share adjoining territories and other attributes, they engaged in constant battle as a means of emphasizing what they believe makes them unique and more special. Those with social and political power claim superiority. We fail to see ourselves in the perceived other. Thus, it's easier to project our own evil thoughts and our own vain desires on somebody with less power than us. Let me just add that we've seen too many examples of wherein people, like in this text with the Samaritans, we've seen too many examples wherein people were criminalized based on identity. Always mass suffering ensues. In this country, it's true after the 1857 Dred Scott decision. It was true after the Oriental Exclusion Act of 1924 that set the stage for Japanese internment. It's true of the 1935 Nuremberg laws, which legalized mass genocide of Jews in Nazi Germany. It was true of the Bantu Education Act of 1953 that formalized racial apartheid in South Africa. All of these were examples of when weak leaders needed strong scapegoats. And the devaluation of one group leads to the eventual dehumanization of all groups. This was the case between Jews and Samaritans. When Jesus asked her for a drink of water, this is why she responds, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" I don't see this woman being rude or disrespectful here. Maybe her response is more a matter of surprise than sass. God only knows what kind of treatment this woman has grown accustomed to from Galilean men and women as they pass through her town, going back and forth from the capital. I'm sure she's well aware of the intentional and unintentional slights, the derogatory remarks, and the commonplace indignities directed at her on a daily basis. Walk with me in your Holy Ghost imagination. I can imagine a Galilean father telling his kids to be mindful of Samaritans on the journey. I can see Galilean women maybe pulling their children closer when a Samaritan comes by. Children may have stared curiously while asking, "Is she one of them, Daddy? A Samaritan?" I can imagine her minding her own business at the well and somebody pulling out a cell phone and calling the police. So maybe, just maybe that was it. That's why she gave this response to Jesus. Or maybe she expected something even more sexually dehumanizing when she saw Jesus smile at her. Here comes another one. I'm not good enough for him to marry, but I'm perfect for him, he thinks, for an afternoon of sexual fulfillment. Yeah, we know that a culture of masculine privilege certainly fueled the oldest profession in the world in this region. And when we couple this with the details provided about this woman's personal life and relationships with many different men, this has led some biblical interpreters to mark this woman as one of ill repute. That explains why in too many pulpits, the woman at the well has become a euphemism for a modern-day sex worker. The interesting thing is that none of that seems to matter to Jesus. Maybe Jesus realized that it was quite possible for this woman to have been trapped in what is known as a Levirate marriage. That is, after the death of multiple spouses, she was not allowed to leave the family, but was just passed down for marriage to the oldest living brother-in-law. Maybe Jesus understood that about this woman. That's quite possible. Such knowledge could be why Jesus restrained judgment and condemnation, and he unleashed grace and mercy. Or maybe not. Maybe Jesus just thought, who cares? And that's, graduates, what I find so beautiful and instructive about this passage. There's no explanation of this woman's circumstances. Those who told this story did not feel the need to explain away this woman's life. Unlike other stories about Samaritan, unlike the story of the Good Samaritan, or unlike the Samaritan leper who returned to thank Jesus, this Samaritan did not have to earn Jesus' compassion. There's no moral clause here in her identity. Jesus' treatment of this Samaritan woman is not predicated on her goodness any more than her marginalization was predicated on her sinfulness. How deviant or how holy her personal lifestyle is was of little consequence. Jesus just sees a woman in desperate need of respect and recognition. It's not about who she is, it's about who he is. And this is the world that you're entering as graduates of Union Presbyterian Seminary. A world that needs you to care. A world that's not about them or the other, but it's about who has God called us to be. We're entering a world that's unapologetically fractured, intentionally estranged, and arrogantly alienated. We've hung hateful labels around the necks of entire groups. We've built xenophobic walls around our presumed in-groups, and we've entombed our own souls in the burial grounds of cultural bigotry. Now, as much as ever, our society needs to both hear and see men and women who can bear witness to this Jesus, the one who cares. The one who shares across lines of difference. The one whose power is not defined by rank, position, or financial profit, but rather a capacity to extend empathy and compassion. This is the importance of this model that Jesus provides for us. It's not pity. For he learned as much from this woman as she does from him. It's not supercilious, as her humanity and dignity is as valuable as his own. And it's not transactional, as Jesus doesn't seek anything in return, because the act of compassion in itself is its own reward. For when you and I greet and treat fellow humans with the grace and compassion of God, we're reflecting God's love, God's kindness, and God's grace toward us. So who cares that you're graduating today? God cares. Let us go do likewise.